Welcome to the introduction to Local Disaster Resilience Framework. My name is Israel and I am from Asian Disaster Preparedness Center. The learning objectives for this module is to discuss the different factors which contribute to local disaster resilience and to understand the priority objectives of the framework. Now, who is responsible for local disaster resilience? In this slide that you see a lot of stakeholders are part of the planning process. Imagine this as the city that you belong to or the community that you belong to, and you have people around the table trying to contribute from their expertise on trying to understand each and everyone's responsibility. For example, we have the local government that's partially responsible for contributing to local disaster resilience. You also have banks, and you also have local communities, you have women's groups, you have children, and you also have schools as part of local disaster resilience. Now, these agencies and these stakeholders are part of the planning process. Now, what we know is that local resilience is a shared responsibility and is not supposed to be the responsibility of a single organization or a single community. From what we understand that there are 4 key characteristics of a disaster resilient community. For example, the community has to have the ability to identify the different types of hazards, exposures, and vulnerabilities. Communities should also have the ability to prepare and plan at the household or community level for disaster impact. In addition, communities should also have the ability to use local capacities to absorb shocks and functions while under stress. Stress meaning the types of disaster impact or the type of emergency that is currently happening. And communities should also have local capacity to successfully respond and recover using community support systems such as the local police and fire departments. Some of the key factors which contribute to local resilience include understanding of local risk, communicating and educating people about these risks, and using these risk information to support your planning and initiatives at the local level. Lastly, we want to also empower residents and local entities to handle different types of disaster risk. In addition to supporting capabilities for disaster resilience and partnering coordinated effort for disaster resilience. In Korea, local disaster resilience refers to the ability of local entities based in a specific si, gun, or gu to absorb shocks, function, and sustain critical system in times of disaster, and to work together to adapt to the locality of the changing environment. Now, we have developed a local disaster resilience framework for Korea to understand how communities can prepare for and respond to different types of disasters. Now, the aim of this framework is to overall have a reflection of disaster resilience for a particular local area. The objectives of this framework is to comprehend the disaster resilience of a locality with respect to the different dimensions. The dimensions here in this framework are composed of 4 different types of dimensions. And you have to understand these 4 different types of dimensions, which particularly the local needs to have and build on them. So if you can look at the 4 different types of local disaster resilience framework in Korea, we start off with the local hazards, exposure, and vulnerabilities on this quadrant here. Planning and procedures for disaster and safety management, as you can see here. Local resources, capacity, and knowledge, as you can see right here. and local engagement and networks, as you can see here. So these are the 4 quadrants where we want to make sure that local disaster resilience framework is built on. So we start off with local hazards, exposure, and vulnerability. These means that we have to forecast the different types of national or natural hazards for all localities. We also have to have early warning information, which is consistent with the national standards, and develop an understanding beyond the prevalent hazards in a specific area. We have to also understand the different exposure, the different vulnerability and capacity assessment for each local area. As part of it, the availability of comprehensive risk profile for each locality so we can prioritize the different types of actions that we have to do. Under planning procedures for disaster and safety management, some of the key things that we want to understand, for example, how do we update disaster and safety management plans based on the updated risk information that we were able to get from this site? Disaster safety and management plans also have to have clear roles and responsibilities between agencies that's providing support to the actions. And local risk information from the risk assessment is also used for other local level plans and other initiatives. On the local resources, capacity, and knowledge, we have to have appropriate resources, capacity, and knowledge, which is very critical or very essential for local resilience. We also have to have budget so that we can build the skills of human resource, and we also have the capacity of local entities which can help us in realizing the different plans and initiatives, and to be so that we are able to also implement these plans and initiatives. And we also have to build on our own existing knowledge and capacity at the local level, which leads us to a better understanding of the local context. What's very important to the local disaster resilience framework is engaging the local society and the networks. For example, our governance has to be around the disaster and safety management for each locality. We have to have different platforms, we have to have different partnerships, we have to have different networks so that we can use this to bring together all the different local entities to a more holistic approach towards resilience. This one. What's very important as well is under the local hazard exposure and vulnerabilities, if we can start there, is that we have to have a comprehensive natural hazard induced risk assessment, which is undertaken regularly for each locality to produce local natural hazard induced disaster profile. So we have to have a disaster profile so that we understand the different types of hazard, the different types of vulnerability, and the different types of exposure. Natural hazard monitoring, forecasting, early warning system is also nationally consistent and clear to all local residents and entities. Korea has an early warning system, and we have to understand the early warning system process where we would know how to respond to specific natural hazards. Under planning and procedure for disaster and safety management, the primary objectives of this include planning for disaster and safety management, which are prepared and updated regularly at the local level, along with procedures outlining the clear roles and responsibilities based on local hazards, exposure, and vulnerability. So the information we were able to get in here has to fall into the planning part of it. The risk information that we were able to uncover provides input to how we plan for the different safety and management measures. So risk information is used for different land use plans, land zonation, local development, for businesses, and maintenance and protection of infrastructure. Under local resources, capacity, and knowledge, some of the objectives include the provision of adequate budget and capacity at the locality for implementing plans and procedure for local disaster resilience. Of course, we do need funding, we do need budget to make sure that we are able to implement our disaster resilience activities or initiatives that is coming out from our disaster management plans or disaster resilient plans. We also have to have our local residents, our local groups, non-government organization, business entities which are supported to develop the needed resources or the required resources to attain the knowledge to handle different natural hazard-induced disaster risks so that we can enhance their capacity to prevent and cope with disasters. Under local engagement and networks, some of the priority objectives include the engagement of local residents, local groups, non-government organizations, and business entities for disaster and safety management at the locality by the local government. We also need to have the presence of partnerships and networks to bring together the local residents, the government, and other local entities such as the police department or fire department so that we have a more coordinated approach towards local disaster resilience. And that should be all from my side. The next module is about using the disaster resilience framework tool, which will be conducted by my colleague from ADPC. Thank you very much. This is Israel from ADPC.